Morning. Welcome to 35. Get done. Get through it. But man, it's still a lot, but it's not as much as it was. Continuing with Patty Hearst. Sudden political conversions can be achieved in much the same sorts of ways that working for religious conversions. Whoa. Sudden political conversions can be achieved in much the same kind of ways that work for religious conversions. Induced emotional fervor commands the same rallying power regardless of the end in mind. T.H. Qualter, in Propaganda and Psychological Warfare, describes how Hitler did it. Uniforms, bands, flags, symbols were all part of the German propaganda machine designed by Hitler and Goebbels to increase the impact of strong words by evidence of strong deeds. Meetings were not just occasions for people to make speeches. They were carefully planned theatrical productions in which settings, lighting, background music, and timing of entrances and exits were devised to maximize the emotional fervor of an audience already brought to fever pitch by an hour or more given over to singing and the shouting of slogans. Singing and shouting of slogans. Shouting of slogans. The same psychological principles which serve to keep the religious converts converted also work to maintain the cohesion of political groups. Use it like a microphone. The psychologist Andrew Molnar, who made an extensive study of the nature of insurgent groups, concluded that two principles were vital for the establishment and maintenance of group bonds. The first is that action shapes attitudes. Therefore, initiates tend to be required to carry out an act that proves allegiance to the cause. The second is conformity, which is ensured by self-criticism sessions, long, wearying, abstract discussions which exhaust participants, indoctrination sessions, and perhaps unexpectedly, the assent on democracy within the group. Individuals are allowed to have their own say and therefore believe that they are participating in decision-making, although the decision is likely to be made by the leader anyway. By giving power to people on committees, the same effect is achieved. The power only goes so far, but it is a sop to any divisive, like to sop up your gravy. The power only goes so far, but it is a sop to any decisive ambitions that may develop within the group. The most recent celebrated and contested case of political brainwashing was that of Patty Hearst. People usually appear to choose to join revolutionary groups, or they choose to attend the rallies where their emotions are whipped into fervor. But Patty Hearst did not choose to be exposed to the philosophy of the Revolutionary Party that kidnapped her. Did she ever have the chance to exercise choice in the events that ensued and culminated in her participation in attempted armed robbery for political ends? Patty Hearst, the daughter of the American millionaire, was kidnapped from her flat in Berkeley, when she shared with her fiancé in February 1974. 3 members of the Symbionese Libyan army knocked at the door, forced their way in with guns, and then dragged Patty away to a flat in Delhi City, where she was left, gagged and blindfolded, in a closet. She said at her trial that initially she didn't even know she was in a closet. She thought it was a coffin, and that the plan was to bury her alive. Several times that night one of the revolutionary group threatened her with death if she tried to run away. The next day, one of the group, Cinque, I'm going to call it Cinque. Cinque told Patty that her parents had committed crimes against the people and that she was going to be tried for them by the People's Court. He kept questioning her about her family's financial affairs in such a way, she said in court, that she felt he knew all the answers already. Throughout this and the next day, members of the group made a point of impressing on her that it made little difference to him, or to them, whether she was killed or not. Patty spent 57 days in one closet or another. Shortly after the kidnap, she was made to demand on tape that her father meet the SLA's ransom demands. But she was being fed with information from SLA that was unlikely that the Hearst Corporation but she was being fed the information that it was unlikely that the Hearst Corporation would come up with the money because her parents didn't care about her. Ooh, that's a number one, remember? In breakdown situation, number one, isolate them, make them feel that nobody cares for them. Her mother was wearing a black dress. Everyone was talking about me like I was dead, Patty said. Although Patty remained blindfolded in the closet, the group started to talk to her about their revolutionary plans. They told her that the huge food share out for the poor, which was part of the ransom demand, had been a failure because the Hearsts weren't trying. They just wanted to provoke the SLA into murdering Patty. So the first thing they wanted was a food share out for the poor. Didn't they think they were Robin Hood? They started to train her to use guns in case the FBI forced their way into the flat. Still, while she was in the closet, Patty testified, two of the SLA members made her have the yummies with them. Well, she was struggle intimacy with them. She didn't offer resistance. A month later, the group moved into a new address in San Francisco. Patty was taken in a rubbish can and locked Patty once again in a closet. On April 1st, they let her out at last and told her that they were going to let her go. Just before that time, Cinque had spoken to her in the closet and told her that she in fact had a choice. She could go, or she could stay and join their movement. William Harris, one of the SLA, put it this way: "We had to help Tiana," Patty was given a new name, "understand what it meant to each of us to be a guerrilla so that she could bring it to a personal level in her own head. On her part, she had to convince us that she was being honest, objective, and realistic. At the last second before Tiana took off her blindfold, Cinque reminded her that she could walk away freely out of the door and that we would help her return to her family and friends. We all wanted Tiana to stay, but we wanted to make sure that she saw all her options and was making a strong choice with no regrets or indecision." In the Chicago Tribune, February 6th, 1776. Patty decided to stay. In a manuscript which she later prepared with two surviving SLA members, William and Emily Harris, she said that she had gradually started to feel sympathy with the SLA cause. At meals, at first, she had sat silent in her blindfold, but after a while, she started to join in the discussions and began to see the evil of U.S. imperialism. She said that she had opened her eyes and realized it was time to get off her ass and harass art. Her story in court was different. She claimed she never really believed that she could make a choice to leave. She thought she was being tested, and that, if she opted for home, she would die. After her release from the closet, she made another tape in which she stated that she was now a member of the SLA and was renouncing her old life. A bank robbery plan was started on almost immediately. Patty, now Tanya, was photographed holding a gun and standing in front of the SLA symbol. She was trained for her part in the proposed robbery, and Sneak told her that she was to make a speech in the bank. He knew there was a camera there. Patty duly appeared on film and, on another tape, took responsibility for the crime. She didn't, however, make the speech in the bank. She was told, she said, that the FBI would shoot her on sight. The SLA then moved to Los Angeles, where military training and classes in readiness for the revolution hotted up. In May, 2 members, William and Emily Harris, were caught in the act of shoplifting from a sports shop. Patty, waiting in the car outside, fired her gun at the building several times to cover their escape. The next day, all of the SLA but those 3 were killed when, during a battle with the police, a building caught on fire and burned all those inside. Patty stayed with the Harrises, traveling with them to San Francisco, where she was arrested 16 months later in a flat in which she was living, some few miles away from the Harrises. The question in the public mind was, why did she stay with 2 lone survivors of the SLA when she had her own chance to escape? Why, in fact, had she acted to save them at the sports shop? Patty said in court that the latter had become an automatic action. She had been trained to respond in that way if trouble arose. She also said that the Harrises had planned to keep SLA alive and wanted her with them. They said they would find and kill her if she escaped. Patty and the Harrises traveled to New York and then Pennsylvania, where they worked on a book about the SLA. Patty's contribution was an interview the Harrises held with her, in which they told her what to say, she claimed, and an autobiographical section which was also edited. During the 16 months when Patty was free, she traveled apart from the Harrises sometimes, and actually lived apart from them at the end. Although she said she did that because she was frightened of them, she still considered escape attempts hopeless because the Harrises would find her. You know, I'm totally going to have to review this. I've never actually watched the Patty Hearst story, but it seems to me that I don't believe her. I believe she could be Stockholm, but I believe that she wanted to be part of that, in a way. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just an opinionated granny. But this was like in the news constantly. It was in my lifetime. I was born in 72, and this happened in 76. The trial happened, so all this, her becoming brainwashed, happened when I was just a baby. Alright. By the time she was brought to trial, her position had changed. She stressed her fear of the SLA, not her sympathy. She explained almost all actions as having been done because she knew she was supposed to do them. She even smiled, she said, because she was supposed to smile, so that she would look more like her media photographs and therefore be more recognizable. The defense called upon the brainwashing experts, psychiatrists who had studied the repatriated POWs back to back up their case that Patty wasn't responsible for her actions. Louis Joyon West found similarities between the pressures put on Patty and those to which the POWs had been subjected, particularly disorientation, fear and dread, hopelessness. Just as the POWs were led to believe that no one at home cared or wrote, so Patty was imbued with the information that her parents considered her as good as dead and had no more interest in her. Lufton gave the opinion that Patty's compliance was inevitable under the circumstances, and that compliance can continue beyond the time of actual coercion. Lufton said that Patty had undergone all the emotional upheaval experienced by the POWs, induced in them by their captors. The helplessness, the identity assault, surfacing of buried guilt, humiliation, self-betrayal through confession, relief as a result of confession, gratitude for a show of leniency, which then catapulted the prisoner into an eagerness to comply and a thirst for survival, to which, for the first time, he can see his way. Both West and Lufton found Patty to be suffering the same kinds of neurotic reactions after her arrest that the POWs experienced on repatriation. Time check. Witnesses for the prosecution tried to show that Patty did act of her own free will when she participated in the bank robbery. Psychiatrist Dr. Joel Fort, who had studied many kidnapped victims, drew attention to the fact that Patty had not been a dutiful daughter. She had been an independent, rebellious, rejected Roman Catholicism, her family's religion, took drugs, and moved in with a man for whom her family was not too fond. I should have known that you would see her that way, because you insisted that the author put Dr. Joel Fort when everybody else was content to be Louis Joslin, a psychiatrist. So, you suck. Yes, talking to the effigy of Joel Fort, doctor. He described her as an all-or-nothing sort of person, the very type whom Eric Hofford had described in The True Believer. She was more similar to than different from the SLA, most of whom had come from standard middle class backgrounds, and most of whom had come to feel dissatisfaction with their lives just as Patty did. The SLA, to Patty, offered meaning in life just as it had come to offer meaning to its members. Patty did get convicted by that court, although, however the jury understood, in the face of conflicting expert evidence. How to decide whether she was brainwashed or not cannot be known. What's interesting to consider, however, is that the evidence from defense and prosecution hardly cancel each other out. They reinforce each other. Whatever the circumstances, Patty did not appear to make decisions that emanated wholly from within. Holy cow. I had a little dry spot in my voice box. Dissatisfaction and uncertainty about one's life would seem to be a strong opposing factor for leaving an individual in an all-too-ready state to embrace something new. Something that can provide the answer and eliminate uncertainty once and for all. A decision made under such circumstances is no more informed than a decision overtly enforced. The question to ask is what constitutes a truly self-willed action. Todd has described, see Chapter 3, how the process of socialization, where values inculcated from childhood are reinforced by the type of people one meets as a result of holding these values, prevents one from learning to cope with the ambiguities of life. In a world where everything is black or white, where if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem, sudden conversions of any kind would be known as a norm, not an oddity. We are this many chapters, like 5 paragraphs, so we're going to continue until we're done with this chapter. In a previous chapter, it has been discussed how elements such as the need to resolve cognitive dissonance, or actions from being sufficient to affect attitudes, can influence behavior. Such as the need to resolve cognitive dissonance, or actions being sufficient to affect attitudes can influence behavior. Patty acted in the bank robbery. She had to square that with her conscience. She was made to speak on tape and write things down, thus participating in her conversion. She apparently made a choice to stay with SLA. Therefore, she would have had to resolve the conflict involved, if there were indeed conflict, by coming to believe in the rightness of that choice. She was a nonconformist type. It was agreed before her capture. Therefore, having conformed to her captor's view of life, it was perhaps to be expected that she would need to embrace it more fully to resolve cognitive dissonance. It might therefore be said that everything in Patty's life, from her upbringing and unresolved emotions to the actual events of her kidnap experience, pointed her in a direction that she took. In The Mind Manipulators, Sheffin and Opton reject the brainwashing explanation whenever it is applied. Quotes saying, brainwashing is more than a scare word. It's also a strangely attractive idea. We do not want to confront Pogo's famous insight. We have met the enemy, and he is us. How much more comforting to think, we have met the enemy, and he is Satan, or she is a witch, or his mind is possessed by demonic spirits, or he has been brainwashed by the communists, or by the Moonies, or by the Symbolize Liberation Army. Thus, the idea of brainwashing paralyzes thought, because it places responsibility somewhere else. But it might equally well paralyze thought to insist on attributing inexplicable action to consciously willed motives. To reject the idea of brainwashing means, in its widest sense, to reject the idea that we are ever out of control of our own actions. For to admit that we can be swayed and manipulated is possibly more frightening than to admit that others can choose to perform socially or politically or morally unacceptable actions. This, we begin chapter 9. I might actually do long readings just to get them done. We need to, what do they call that? Speed run! Alright. Until later.